All right, so now we're going to go over how to make some handles. I'm going to show you a few different handles as we do this. Just so you guys can kind of see, I put together this little guy here, and it's just a little small teacup or maybe a small espresso cup. And one thing I want you to notice is that the base of this extends out past, like that piece that we made earlier. The bottom portion or the foot portion where it touches the table, that was actually connected or kind of like flush, right? So that's what we've got with this one here, kind of flush. And I've rounded it a little bit down here just by kind of rolling it on the table to give it a little bit of shape rather than just being straight up and down. But this one, I've given it kind of almost like this little saucer underneath it, just to be a little visual element there. And then it's kind of kicked up a little bit from the table. It might be hard to see, but it creates a nice shadow line that's down there. There's also a small little handle there. That's a little one-fingered handle. For a small mug like this, or a small cup like this, something like this is going to work out just fine. And if you take a real kind of close look at it right here, you can see that there's still some kind of ooze that's coming out of where the connection is. And that's because I just freshly put this handle on. So I'm waiting for that to dry up a little bit, and then I'll go back and clean it up afterwards, after it dries up a bit. You always want to let it dry up a little bit before you start cleaning it up. Otherwise, you're going to have kind of a little bit of negative space that'll be there as everything dries, and it'll leave a little strange kind of seam that's not going to be as strong. Pushing around just that kind of liquidy slip is not anything that helps that connection at all. But letting it sit up a little bit like this and then going back at it, kind of scraping some of that away, and maybe even going back with it on it with a thin brush of some kind, a thin paintbrush of some kind, so that you can kind of clean up that edge. And if you come at it with a thin paintbrush, you're going to get a little bit of water on it, not a lot. You're not causing any sort of you don't want to cause any sort of a shininess of water to occur on the clay surface. You don't really want that. Okay, if you get that, then you're oversaturating the clay with water, and then you're going to run into some problems. You'll notice that I don't have a lot of those scraps that are laying around here any longer either. I've taken some of those smaller scraps, I've picked them apart, and I've put them back into my slip container so I can have a little bit more slip to use. And then the bigger pieces I've put into a Ziploc bag, and I've added some moisture to them along with a wet sponge, and that's going to help those objects, or sorry, that clay kind of get back to a little bit, add a little bit moisture to the clay so I can wedge it again and use it. That way we don't have any waste. It's very easy for us to do that. We just don't want to, we want to almost make sure that we don't let our clay dry out completely, any of the little scraps that we're using. So have a little baggie, have a little piece of plastic alongside of you so you can be putting those things into it as you're working. All right, so couple of different handles we're going to go over. So I'm going to set these guys aside. You guys know how to score and slip at this point, so we're not going to talk about how to score and slip a handle on. Same way as anything else. We scratch, we slip, we push, we apply that pressure, we let that kind of stuff ooze out. We want to see some of that slip and some of that wetter clay come out from our connection point. If we don't see that happening, what do you think is the issue? The issue is that you didn't add enough moisture. Maybe you didn't scratch in between, maybe you didn't do the scratch, then slip, then scratch again, okay? When I used to teach elementary school, I would always tell my students, scratch, slip, scratch again, push and wiggle, right? That push and wiggle is really important too, because you're actually applying pressure into that clay, compressing, squeezing all that stuff out. If you have enough moisture there from the slip, you're gonna see some of that stuff ooze out. If you don't have enough there, you're not gonna see it ooze out, and that's a good indicator that you're not applying enough slip. Or you might not be applying enough pressure as you push everything together on that push and wiggle. All right, so I've got a couple of pieces of clay here. One piece of clay that I've got is just this one here. What I'm gonna do with this is I'm just gonna kind of squeeze it in my hand. And as I squeeze it in my hand, it's becoming a little bit of a coil. All right, a coil is one way that we can make a handle. So I get it into the kind of that log shape, and then I set it on my table surface and I start rolling it like we've done before for that coil project, right? Same thing that we did for the coil foot, that we did for our pinch pots. So these are all basic building techniques, coil building, pinch building. So I'm trying to get a nice homogeneous thickness of clay here. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but if you want it to be, then you want to go for that, right? So with something like this is a clay or a clay coil, and this clay coil can be bent and it can be turned into a handle in a lot of different ways. Okay. You also can add a little bit of kind of style or aesthetic to this. If you have, grab a couple of tools or grab a couple of things to kind of, make it a little bit different, right? So maybe I want to give it a little bit of like rings of some kind, but very subtle. So I can come in here with just anything, right? Like this is just my, one of my paintbrush tools, and I can use this to kind of give it a couple of little dents or indentations to kind of change the form up a little bit. Applying a little bit of pressure, not a ton, just enough so we can start to see some things kind of change there, okay? And then maybe when I come to make my handle, I don't know where I put my knife tool. All right, we're back. I've got my knife tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off this, one of these spots. Try and get maybe equidistant. And that's just for what I'm thinking about. It's a little bit off, right? But that's no big deal. And one of the other things that we can do is I can take this and I can hold it in my hand like so. And if I take my hand and I start pushing on this and kind of just tapping on that, you can see that it's starting to grow inside of that portion of my hand. And what happens then is I get a little bit of a taper, right? So then instead of it being just, one thickness of a coil, I can start to give it a little bit of character, give it a little bit of form, right? And I'm just kind of adjusting that. Also, one thing that's nice about this when you kind of do what I just did is that it also gives you a little bit more surface area to connect your handle, okay? And I can do the same thing to the other side. And I'm just thinking about how I'm holding this so that way it's in the right configuration. Just a little bit of a tap right there. And that starts to push that down, starts to give it a little bit of a taper. And I like that one a little bit better, so I'm going to go a little bit more with this one, so I get a little bit more of a taper on that. All right, like so. And then one thing that I can do as well, instead of this being, if you want it round, you can have it round, but some handles are a little bit more oblong. So what I can do is just gently push down on this while it's on the table surface to turn it into kind of an oval, right? Make it a little bit wider in one direction rather than being rounded. And I just can manipulate this. This is the beauty of clay. We can just move this stuff around. And I'm even seeing, I don't know, it's hard for maybe you guys to see, but there's a little bit of a curve right here even, and that's gonna maybe take up for that, or account for the curve of the cup, right? Because the cup itself has a curvature to it. It's not straight. So putting a little bit of an indentation here could allow this to connect a little bit easier. And then we take this and we can manipulate it and kind of shape it into any shape that we want. Now, when you do this, you want to be careful, and you notice that I'm doing this very slowly as I start to curl this or start to curve it. And sometimes you'll get some cracks in the surface, but you just kind of give it a little bit of compression like that, and slow movements of this, right? If I just take it and just go wham, and really kind of tweak it, then you end up maybe having an issue where you might have massive cracks. And of course, This all depends too on how dry your clay is. If your clay is a little bit more wet than mine is, I'm kind of working with some kind of drier clay. I really shouldn't be. I should give it a little bit of time, but here we are, right? Like this happens to you guys a lot too, so I want to kind of give you a real world, kind of world view of what you could essentially experience as you're making these objects as well. And so there we go. We've kind of moved this, and it's just kind of a horseshoe, right? And it doesn't have to be, right? You can make it kind of an ear shape. We'll talk about that in a moment. Or you can make it square shaped. I can take this and kind of push like this. And I've kind of gotten into square shaped handles recently. And I could turn it into something that's a little bit more square shaped, right? And so this would be like probably like a one-fingered handle for me, or somebody a little bit with smaller fingers, maybe a two-finger handle. And those are things you want to think about as well. You also want to think about how it relates to your object, right? If I were to put this on the side of this and put it right here, right? Does that look like it's too big or too small? To me, it looks like it's too small where it's located. But what I could do is I could put it down at the bottom or up at the top, and it doesn't look quite as bad, right? I'm a fan of a low handle, like so, on some of my objects that I make. And that's something that could work out, right? And when you put this on your object, you want to make sure that it lines up correctly as well, make sure that it's straight, okay? So that's one idea for a handle. That's using a coil. Certainly we could have left that coil as a rounded coil, and we could have done anything that we wanted with it. We could have squeezed it in one direction and then another direction and made some changes in it, and there's just no end to what you can potentially do with a handle. So now I'm just kind of reinforcing that mark that I made earlier, that kind of, it disappeared a little bit when I made it, right? So if I come back, kind of add that mark in there again, I can bring a little bit different character to it, a little bit different aesthetic to it. And sometimes, with glaze can hang up on some of these things in pretty interesting ways. And see, now we see it from that direction, and it looks quite a bit different, right? Than the part on the bottom. So, I could come back and I can do that to that if this was the handle I was going to use, and then I could score and slip it onto my piece, however it is that I wanted to do it. Okay, so there we go. That's that one style of handle. All right, so another style of handle could be something like a slab handle. And a slab handle, we can treat just like we treated this last handle that we did. We're gonna start out by squeezing it into a log shape. And then what we can do is the same thing. We can kind of take this and roll it and turn it into a coil. Or if you already have some slab pieces, you can use those already cut slab pieces. Remember, we talked about saving some of those, if you want to use a slab handle. You can save some of those and you can use those to create your slab handles, okay? So I've got this piece, it's ready to go. And what I can do is just kind of come here and I can start hitting this down onto the table surface to start flattening it out, just like we did when we made our slabs. And I can do this, right? I can do this kind of a number. Same thing that we did before. And this is creating a nice slab. Okay, and then we can come back at it. If you want to get it a little bit more precise, maybe roll over it with a dowel or a rolling pin. And now we've got a small slab, okay? Then I can come back in here with a straight edge. Again, I'm working on my board, so I'm not going to use my X-Acto blade, so I don't cut my board, unless you have kind of one board that you use for cutting, which some people do, and another board. You notice I put that little piece over there. I'm going to reuse that. I'm going to take that, I'm going to crumble it up, or make it into small pieces, and then I'm going to add that to my slip container so I can get some good slip. And I'm going to line this up. This is one of the beauties, I think, of using this clear ruler that I have. Cut another piece off. This is exactly how I made the handle for this object, okay? I made that by just using a slab, okay? So I've got that all set to go. Now I'm going to take this and I'm going to cut it probably just longer than I really need to, because I can make an adjustment once I get this onto my object. But I'm just cutting it where I've got, those, where it's the right thickness. Does it have to stay the same? Does it have to be the same thickness here and here? No, we can make it taper if you want to, right? There's no rules as to how you have to make these handles. You guys get to create whatever it is that you want to create, right? There's even, I had a student in the past that made handles for his pieces, and all of the handles were sculpted animals for each one of his cups. So there's no answer as to exactly, and I'm just showing you a couple of different ways to make handles using a coil, using a slab, and then I'm going to show you how to do a pulled handle here in just a moment, which is a very classic kind of potter technique. But I've got my own twist on it. Thanks to a friend of mine that I went to school with. So now I've got this. So now we do the same thing. We slowly, while we're kind of compressing and pushing in, we can turn this into whatever shape it is that we want to make, right? I remember I talked a little bit about an ear-shaped handle. This is kind of a classic, ear-shaped handle that you would maybe use for a cup or a mug, right? That's something that's normal. Okay, so we use these a lot in ceramics. And sometimes this portion kind of dips down a little bit lower. It all just depends on how you want that portion of your cup to be held. But what we tend to try not to do is, if I have this handle on my object, okay, what I don't want to do is have this handle kind of come up above the rim, okay? Right? If I connect this handle and I put it way up here and it's kind of going up above the rim, within the tradition of pottery, this is not something we traditionally would do, because it makes it impossible for us to take and put these pieces upside down. Upside down is a lot of times how people end up putting these things in their cupboard. And that's so dust and all sorts of debris and whatnot doesn't get inside of things, okay? Also, when it does something like this and goes above, it starts to compete with the rim, right? In terms of visually, right? The rim of the object is traditionally, or very often, is kind of the top, and the rim is actually defining the top or the end of the object. And down here below where the foot is, that's kind of defining that portion of this object as well. Okay, and right now I don't really have a quote-unquote foot, but if you can kind of see it, it kind of just digs down a little bit this way and kind of has a little bit of an undercut. And that kind of absence of a foot kind of makes that foot visual. If you think about the traditional mug that you might get that says like "World's Greatest Mom" or Dad, or "I Heart My Girlfriend, My Boyfriend," those are mugs that just go straight down. Okay, they go straight down to the surface to the table surface, and that's an okay thing to do, right? But we can make it a little bit more interesting. If you want, you can actually put some sort of a foot ring on the bottom to kind of elevate this a little bit. But if I were to do that on something like a mug, it'd be a pretty shallow foot, not quite as tall as the feet that we made for our pinch pots. So just things to think about, okay? You don't have to have a foot. You also can, honestly, here's a little bit of a coil that I made earlier, right? I could take this, and I've seen a couple of artists do this recently, actually. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to cut 3 of these. That are the same thickness, the same height, if you will. And I can manipulate these into being as round as I want them to be, just all depending on what I'm looking for as the maker. And this might not be easy to see from the top camera, but take a look at the straight on camera. And what you could do, right, is score and slip these things on to where they're just right near the edge. They don't have to be over the edge, but right near the edge. And they're going to be equal distant apart, so I'll have to maneuver that one a little bit, right? And let's pretend that I scored and slipped these on so that they could be part of this mug, right? And then if I take this and turn it over, right? And I could squash this down a little bit, right? I'm not going to do it because it'll kind of change the configuration. I don't know, maybe I'll do it, but I would have scored and slipped them in the first place. I could squish them down and kind of squash it down just a little bit more, and they'll kind of ooze out of that edge, and having them stick out slightly from the base of this mug shape, that could be really interesting, and that could add a lot of creativity to your objects. That's just something that you could potentially try if you're looking to go for it, right? But again, scratch, slip, scratch again, push and wiggle to get those things on there. You'll see that I just kind of pushed them on there, but now I can pull them off and there's not even any evidence that they were there at any point in time, okay? So that's just something that I thought about in the middle of doing this. So anyways, we've got that slab piece, you know, that can create any kind of a handle, okay? It could be more of a U-shaped handle like this, all sorts of different options, okay? So that's another kind of a option for a handle. Okay, again, paying attention, making sure you don't get too many surface cracks here. If you do, you can come through here once it stiffens up a little bit, and you can start to, you know, kind of compress those things to get those surface cracks away, right? The surface cracks can actually grow into bigger cracks and cause some issues, right? Maybe even breaking in the process, okay? If this is too much thinner than the thickness of your mug itself, then that may be an issue as well. All things that we need to consider as we're making, okay? So if you have any questions about any of this kind of stuff, for sure, you guys can contact me. Use my office hours. You can shoot me an email. However it is that you want to get a hold of me, it all works out, okay? So that's a slab handle. Then the last one that I'm going to talk to you guys about, and not that this is the last end all and there's only 3 kind of handles that we could ever create. This is why I want you guys to be taking a look and doing the discussion that we're going to have, and that's because we're going to be looking at cups with handles and taking a look at those things so that we can see differences within all sorts of different creative styles, okay? So I've got another chunk of clay, and this chunk of clay I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to start squeezing this into a log shape, but this time I'm going to turn it more into a carrot shape. And I want to make it into a carrot shape because the traditional pulled handle is something that tapers quite a bit, and it has a very specific look to it. And so I want to get this this kind of carrot shape going on for this piece. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to again roll it in the coil, so I can get a little bit thinner than where we stood. All right, it doesn't need to be that thick. The traditional pulled handle gets pulled the entire time, and you just kind of start out with a chunk of clay. But I've, you know, a buddy of mine who I went to school with, John Gennady, he kind of introduced me to this way of making a pulled handle, which I think is a lot better because the pulling part is the hardest part. And it's where a lot of times students and even myself kind of get hung up because it kind of can get messed up. So what I do is make this this kind of nice carrot shape, and then I'm going to set it down on the table. And I'm going to stand up to do this. I'm going to adjust this camera so you guys can see what's going on. We'll have a close and a kind of further away camera, if you will. Let's see, there we go. All right, so I'm going to set this down here on the table. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hands and put them together like this, like I'm making a shadow puppet butterfly, okay? And I'm going to push down like so, going all the way down this little carrot, or this big carrot, and so I can turn it more into a triangle, okay? You can see kind of how it's this triangular shape now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here and I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to tap that down and and flatten it out. Now, if we were to cut this into a cross section, it would look kind of like a trapezoid, okay? Then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lift it up because it sticks to the table, leaves some moisture down there, right? So now I'm gonna put it onto another spot on the table, and I'm gonna do this one more time. This is so I can get the thickness that I want of my pulled handle, okay? Now I'm gonna do the same thing, push down on this. All right, now we're gonna come back up a little bit with this camera so you guys can see what's happening here. I've got a bowl of water, all right? This bowl of water So with this bowl of water, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get my clay wet. And when I get this clay wet, I'm gonna take this and I'm actually gonna put it right inside and get it completely as wet as I can, okay? And now what I'm gonna start doing is I'm gonna start shaping this. I'm gonna push this up just a hair so you can see everything that's happening. All right, we wanna get it nice and wet. You want your hand wet as well, okay? So now what I'm gonna start doing is I'm gonna start actually kind of pulling this handle. What I'm doing is just taking my hand and I'm wrapping it around, right? In this configuration, not like this, where this flat part is gonna go against this part of your hand, okay? That kind of webbed bit that's right there between the thumb and the index finger, right? And I'm gonna start pulling down. And notice that I've left some of that without getting it wet. You see that? It's wet from about here down. It's not wet there. That's my hand. That's the portion I can hold on to right now to kind of control everything. And it takes a little bit of practice to get this, but I'm actually applying some pressure as I'm pulling down on this. And the shape that I'm creating right here is that similar trapezoid kind of a shape. It's just kind of hard to see, but you'll feel it as you're working on this. And you can see that some of my finger marks are going away from how I originally tapped down on that and made some lumps and bumps. Those lumps and bumps are going away. And this thing is starting to become a little bit longer, okay? Now, the other thing that I can do is I can use my fingers, and we want this kind of stuff to happen on our hand. We want to get some of that slip, that clay slip on our hands. Helps us out quite a bit. I can take this and I can use my thumb and I can squeeze my thumb a little bit harder into the clay to give it a little bit of an indentation here going down. But I'm going very slow as I do that and steady so that I don't get any portions of it where it's higher or lower. It's a nice good curve that's there. So, and it's kind of hard to see. Maybe you can see from the top camera. I'm gonna try and move it over there. You can kind of see that there's like a little bit of a concaveness that's happening right here down the middle, almost where that spine used to be, okay? And the nice thing about this when you're not really pulling the handle is that you can go both up and down when you're shaping this. Really the portion that you're using, the pulling, and using the water is really more for shaping than it is for anything else. And I'll use my fingers like this to kind of maneuver my hand back and forth to get the shape that I'm looking for, to get that pulled handle kind of a feel to this object. Once again, like I said, this is a very classic style handle, something we use a lot in pottery. And again, this is my kind of little take on it, thanks to a buddy and some manipulations along the way, okay? So now I've got a nice flat bit on the back. The front part has that concaved portion, okay? And everything's kind of set to go. What I can do too is if I take this and just, you can see because it's so wet, if I go like this, I can just kind of manipulate it, and let it kind of hang out in that configuration. And if I move the bowl away, right? And I take this and I set it down on the table, I can kind of set it down and get a nice beautiful curve, right? I'm gonna move the camera down a little bit so you can see it. A nice beautiful curve that can happen with that handle. And if I want it to be a little bit different, I can come in here and manipulate it. Notice I'm not touching the inside part, because if I touch the inside part, then I'm gonna mess with this curve that's happening right here, all right? I don't really want to mess with that curve because you can create such a nice curve just by letting gravity and the clay do all the work for you. That's one of the wonderful things about a pulled handle, is doing something like this. So if I let this sit up for just a little bit of time, you know, maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes, maybe an hour, depending on the weather that day, what we can end up happening is having this wonderful pulled handle. I'll end up cutting it off the way that I want it to be configured and connected to my object. And then I can scratch, slip, scratch again, push and wiggle, all sorts of different things like that. And I can make the handle that I want. So those are 3 styles of handles that you guys can use. Any one of these will do. Again, this is not the only way that we can do this pulled handle either. I have been making a lot of square-shaped handles recently, and what I end up doing is cutting them off, and then once they stiffen up a little bit, I end up manipulating them into more of a square kind of shape like this to be the handle that I want. So many different options. I hope you guys have a good time searching and trying to find something that works for you. Again, those are 3 different techniques of making a handle, and you could probably go on YouTube and find 20 more demonstrations on handles that look at handles in a completely different way than the way that I just did, okay? One thing I want to mention about this, okay, this container of water, you want to be really careful. Like this one, we didn't get a lot of clay in it, right? But if you pull a whole bunch of handles and you get a bunch of clay in the bottom of your bucket or your bowl, and you want to have a good amount of water. You can see how much water I put in this bowl, okay? It's not just a little bit, it's not like a 1/4 of an inch on the bottom of it, it's quite a bit of water. Not the best case scenario to put this down the drain in your house. So what you can do is you can go outside and just throw it onto the grass. Clay is dirt. It belongs outside like that. It's okay to do that. Okay, it's not going to hurt anything. There's nothing in the clay that's going to damage your grass or any planters. You can also use this just to water plants if you have any plants around your place. That's a completely fine thing to do. With my hand, what I'm going to probably do is just kind of come here and get most of it off in the bucket. All right, and then just use a towel to kind of get this, dry my hand off, okay? So, again, those are handles. Have a good time.